The scent of expensive wine and humiliation burns in my throat as Vincent Carstairs stands over me, his laughter cutting through the dining room like broken glass. My hands shake as I clutch my order pad, tears blurring the crystal chandeliers overhead into smeared stars. The woman in the Chanel jacket glares at me with cold fury, the burgundy stains spreading across her shoulder like accusation itself. I did not spill that wine. Jason did when he rushed past my station 20 minutes ago, too hurried to even apologize. But Vincent does not care about truth. He cares about performance, about power, about making examples of servers who dare to exist in his restaurant without groveling. I try again to explain, my voice breaking over the words. Vincent's smile widens. He asks the entire dining room if they can believe the audacity, the absolute refusal to take responsibility. His voice carries across white tablecloths and silent patrons who watch like this is dinner theater they paid extra to see. Shame crawls up my spine, hot and suffocating. Through my tears, I see the kitchen staff frozen in the service window, their expressions carefully blank. No one will speak for me. No one ever does. Vincent leans closer, his breath coffee and contempt, telling me I am lucky he does not fire me on the spot, that I should be grateful he is giving me another chance, despite my incompetence. The other servers have melted into corners and shadows, grateful it is me and not them tonight. I taste salt and fury as tears track down my face. Then the room changes. The air itself shifts, pressure dropping like before a storm, and every conversation dies mid-sentence. I feel it before I see him, the weight of dangerous attention turning toward the entrance. Vincent straightens, his cruel smile faltering. I turn toward the door, and my breath catches somewhere between my lungs and throat. The man standing in the entrance wears a suit that probably costs more than my annual rent, charcoal gray stretched across shoulders that speak of controlled violence. His face is all sharp angles and cold beauty, dark hair silvered at the temples, a jaw that could cut diamonds. But it is his eyes that freeze me in place, pale gray like winter ice, scanning the restaurant with predatory focus before landing on my tear-stained face and staying there. I recognize him from newspaper photos that never captured the reality of his presence. Alexander Thornhill. Everyone in this city knows that name, whispers it with fear or reverence depending on which side of his world they occupy. Criminal, enforcer, untouchable. The man who owns half the city through means the law cannot quite prove, and he is staring at me like I am the only person in this room worth seeing. I have seen his photograph in newspapers, grainy surveillance images that accompany articles about organized crime and federal investigations that never quite managed to stick. But those flat images captured nothing of the reality standing in the Meridian's entrance. Alexander Thornhill radiates danger the way a furnace radiates heat, invisible but undeniable, and I feel it from across the dining room like a physical force against my skin. Vincent's transformation is instantaneous and nauseating. The cruel manager who moments ago delighted in my humiliation now becomes a groveling servant, rushing forward with his hand extended, an obsequious smile plastered across his face, welcoming Mr. Thornhill with the kind of desperate enthusiasm reserved for health inspectors and ownership. Alexander does not even glance at him. His attention remains locked on me with an intensity that makes my pulse stutter and skip. Vincent's voice rises slightly, nervous now, trying again to capture the attention of this dangerous man who has decided Vincent does not exist. The other diners watch with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident in slow motion. Alexander moves through the restaurant like he owns it. Perhaps he does for all I know. His expensive shoes silent on marble floors as he crosses the space between us. Up close he is even more devastating, tall enough that I have to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. And those eyes are studying my tear-streaked face with an expression I cannot decipher. What happened here? His voice is quiet, almost gentle, but it cuts through the room like a blade and everyone freezes. Vincent starts to answer, his tone dismissive, beginning some explanation about difficult employees and customer satisfaction, but Alexander lifts one hand slightly, and Vincent's words die mid-sentence. The gesture is minimal, barely a movement at all, but the authority behind it is absolute. Alexander asks again, still looking only at me, his voice dropping even lower. Tell me what happened. I should be terrified. Every instinct screams that this man is dangerous, that his interest in me is a threat, that I should run. Instead, I find myself caught by those winter-gray eyes that look at me like I matter. Like my answer actually means something to someone with power. My voice shakes when I speak, but I force the words out anyway. The wine I did not spill, the accusation I could not defend against, Vincent's mockery performed for an audience that enjoyed the show. I watch something shift in Alexander's expression, a coldness settling over his features that makes the temperature in the room seem to drop 10 degrees. He finally turns to Vincent, and I see my manager take an involuntary step backward. Mr. Carstairs. Alexander's use of Vincent's formal name sounds like a judge pronouncing sentence. This woman is under my protection. The lie detonates like a bomb in the silent restaurant. I hear gasps, see the Chanel woman's eyes widen, watch color drain from Vincent's face. I have no idea why Alexander Thornhill just claimed me as his, but the words reshape reality around us. Vincent stammers something, an apology maybe, his earlier cruelty transformed into transparent fear. Alexander waits until Vincent finishes, then speaks again with terrifying calm. You will apologize to her properly, now. Vincent's apology is a broken thing, words tumbling over themselves without coherence or dignity, and I watch this man who tormented me for months reduce himself to a stammering mess before Alexander's cold stare. I am sorry, Miss Whitmore, truly sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I should never have spoken to you that way. Please accept my deepest apologies. His voice cracks on the last word, and I feel nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just a strange hollowness where anger used to live. Alexander listens without moving, his expression carved from ice, and when Vincent finally trails into silence, Alexander speaks with devastating quiet. Your apology is inadequate, Mr. Carstairs, but it will suffice for now because we have more important matters to discuss. He pauses, and the pause stretches until the air feels thin. You are terminated, effective immediately. Pack your personal belongings and leave the premises within the hour. Vincent's face goes through a series of transformations, shock to disbelief to panic, and he starts to protest, sputtering about his contract and his rights and how he has worked here for 8 years. Alexander cuts through his words like they are nothing. I own this restaurant, Mr. Carstairs. I have owned it for 6 months through a holding company, which means your employment exists at my pleasure, and your termination is absolute. The revelation crashes through the dining room and I hear gasps, see servers exchanging stunned glances, watch Vincent's face collapse as he realizes he never had power at all, he was only ever permitted to pretend. Alexander continues with the same terrible calm. Miss Whitmore will receive 3 months' salary as compensation for your mistreatment, and a formal letter of apology from ownership will be drafted by tomorrow. The Chanel woman will be compensated for her jacket, and banned from this establishment for participating in the humiliation of staff. You will leave now. Vincent opens his mouth, closes it, looks around the room as if someone might intercede, but every face is carefully blank. He turns and walks toward the kitchen on unsteady legs, his earlier cruelty transformed into defeat, and I watch him disappear through the swinging doors with a sense of unreality coating everything. Alexander finally looks at me again, and his expression softens almost imperceptibly, winter ice thawing by single degrees. Collect your belongings, we are leaving. His tone makes it clear this is not a request, but not quite a command either, something in between that assumes my agreement. I should refuse, should demand explanations, should protect myself from this dangerous man who just upended my life with casual authority. But when I open my mouth, what comes out is a question. Why are you doing this? Alexander studies my face for a long moment, and something unreadable flickers across his features. Because some cruelties cannot be tolerated, and some people should never have been given power over others. His answer explains nothing and everything. He extends his hand toward me, palm up, offering rather than demanding. Trust me, Eleanor. He knows my name and I never told him my name, which should terrify me, but instead I find my hand moving toward his as if pulled by invisible threads. My fingers touch his palm, and his hand closes around mine with surprising gentleness, warm and solid and real. I nod because words have abandoned me entirely, and let this stranger who feels like destiny lead me out of the meridian into whatever comes next. The staff locker room smells like industrial cleaner and stale coffee, familiar and suffocating in equal measure, and my hands shake so badly I drop my keys twice, before managing to unlock the narrow metal door that holds my entire work life. Maria appears beside me, her dark eyes wide with urgency, her voice dropping to a whisper even though we are alone in this cramped space that suddenly feels smaller than ever. Eleanor, what are you doing? That is Alexander Thornhill. Do you have any idea who that man is? They say he runs half the organized crime in this city. They say people who cross him disappear. The federal government has been trying to build a case against him for 5 years, and witnesses keep recanting their statements or vanishing entirely. Her words should cement my fear, should send me running out the back exit into the night. But instead, I find myself remembering the way Alexander looked at me, really looked at me, like I was a person who mattered, instead of a servant who existed to be abused for entertainment. Maria grips my arm, her fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Whatever he wants from you cannot be worth the danger. Please just slip out the back, and I will tell him you left already. You can disappear, start over somewhere else. I pull my sparse belongings from the locker, my spare flats and the cardigan I keep for cold shifts, and the photograph of my parents that I cannot leave behind, and shake my head because I cannot explain even to myself why I am walking toward this dangerous man, instead of away. Maria makes a small, desperate sound and hugs me hard, whispers, "Be careful," calls me crazy, lets me go. The back hallway leading to the employee exit feels longer than usual, each step an opportunity to change my mind and choose safety over whatever insanity compels me forward, but my feet keep moving until I push through the heavy door into the cool night air. Alexander stands beside a car that probably costs more than I will earn in 3 years, sleek black metal that reflects streetlight like still water, and when he sees me, his expression shifts, almost imperceptibly, tension I did not realize he carried easing from his shoulders. He moves to open the passenger door himself, a gesture so unexpected from a man of his reputation that I hesitate on the sidewalk, studying him in the amber glow that makes his features look carved from shadow and gold. The interior smells like leather and something else. Cologne, maybe? Or just the scent of wealth. Foreign and intimidating as he slides into the seat beside me. Close enough that I feel heat radiating from his body, despite the space between us. The door closes with a solid, expensive sound that seals us into this small space together, and the driver pulls smoothly into traffic without needing instructions, like this route was predetermined, like my choice was already made before I knew I was choosing. Alexander turns slightly toward me, his winter gray eyes studying my face in the dim light. "You are safe now, Eleanor." His voice is quiet, certain, a promise delivered like an oath. I do not feel safe. I feel like my entire life just tilted sideways, and I am sliding towards something I cannot see, cannot predict, cannot control, and the strangest part is that I am not sure I want to stop falling. The city slides past the tinted windows in streams of light and shadow, neon signs bleeding color across glass, streets I have walked 1,000 times suddenly looking foreign from inside this expensive cocoon. And I try to focus on the familiar landmarks instead of the dangerous man sitting so close. His presence fills all the air between us. Alexander breaks the silence first, his voice carefully controlled, like he is choosing each word with precision. I have been watching the Meridian for several months now for business reasons, evaluating the operation and management practices, and during that time I witnessed how Vincent Carstairs treated his staff, particularly the women who worked under him. Tonight, when I saw him humiliating you in front of the entire dining room, I could not allow it to continue. His explanation sounds reasonable, almost mundane, but it does not answer the question burning through my mind. Why did you tell him I was under your protection when we have never met before tonight? Alexander's jaw tightens, the muscle there jumping once, and his hands rest on his thighs with forced casualness that somehow emphasizes the tension coiling through his frame. Some things cannot be explained yet, Eleanor, but I promise you will understand soon. For now, I need you to trust that you were never in danger from me and that everything I did tonight was necessary. His evasiveness should frighten me more than it does, should send alarm bells screaming through my survival instincts, but instead I find myself studying his profile in the intermittent glow of streetlights, cataloging details like I am memorizing something precious. The sharp, clean line of his jaw that looks carved rather than grown, the silver threading through dark hair at his temples that suggests he is older than I first thought, maybe 40 or near it, the thin scar barely visible just above his collar that speaks of violence survived. He is beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful, like storms or deep water or heights that make your stomach drop. Where are we going? My voice sounds steadier than I feel, and Alexander turns slightly toward me, his winter gray eyes catching light and throwing it back like polished stone. To my home where we can speak privately and discuss your future employment options. My pulse spikes and suddenly the car feels smaller than it did moments ago. The air thinner, my lungs working harder to pull oxygen. Employment or imprisonment, I wonder, and hate myself for the thought even as it surfaces because this man just defended me, just destroyed my tormentor, just offered protection when I had none. But Maria's warnings echo in my skull. People who cross him disappear, and I cannot ignore that I am driving toward an unknown location with a man whose reputation is built on violence and whose power is absolute within his world. We turn onto a bridge spanning the river, water below reflecting the city lights in fractured patterns, and I watch the familiar shore recede behind us while the exclusive district ahead grows closer, towers of glass and steel, where people like me only enter through service entrances. Alexander seems to sense my tension because his voice gentles almost imperceptibly. You have my word that you are safe, Eleanor. I will explain everything once we arrive, and then you can decide what happens next. The choice will be yours. The promise should not comfort me coming from a man like him, but somehow it does, his certainty becoming something solid I can lean against in a world that tilted sideways the moment he walked into the Meridian and looked at me like I mattered. The building rises above the river, like a glass monument to wealth and power, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces that throw the city lights back in fractured patterns, and the elevator we take to the top floor moves so smoothly I barely feel the motion, except for the pressure in my ears that tells me we are climbing higher than I have ever been in this city. Alexander stands close, but not touching, his presence filling the small mirrored space until I feel surrounded by him, his reflection multiplying into infinity around us. And when the doors open directly into his penthouse, I step into a space that looks like something from an architecture magazine, all clean lines and expensive minimalism, beautiful and cold as winter. He moves past me with easy familiarity, his hand settling against my lower back in a gesture so light I should barely notice it. But the touch burns through the cheap fabric of my uniform like a brand, his palm warm and solid and grounding even as my mind struggles to process the unreality of being here with this dangerous man in his territory. He guides me toward a sitting area arranged near floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering sprawl below, the city spreading out like scattered jewels on black velvet, and gestures for me to sit on a leather sofa that probably costs more than every piece of furniture I own, combined. Alexander moves to a bar that takes up one wall, crystal and dark wood, and bottles that look like art, and pours amber liquid into two heavy glasses without asking if I want it, the whiskey catching light like honey as he returns, and presses one glass into my hand before settling onto the chair across from me, close enough that our knees almost touch. I take the glass because my hands need something to hold, something to do besides shake, and the weight of it grounds me slightly even though I do not drink, the scent sharp and complex rising from the liquid surface. Alexander leans forward, elbows resting on his knees, and the intensity of his focus makes me feel like the only thing that exists in his world right now. Like everything else has fallen away, leaving just this moment, this conversation, this dangerous negotiation I do not fully understand yet. Eleanor, I own several restaurants and other legitimate businesses that need competent management. I am offering you a position running one of my establishments at triple your current salary, with full benefits and protection from anyone who might retaliate for what happened tonight with Vincent. His offer sounds impossibly generous, the kind of opportunity that should feel like a dream come true. But I have been poor long enough to know that nothing is free, and gifts that seem too good always come with prices hidden in small print. What do you really want from me? My voice comes out steadier than I feel, and Alexander's expression shifts, something hungry and carefully restrained flickering across his features like lightning behind clouds, his winter-gray eyes darkening in a way that makes my breath catch. He holds my gaze for a long moment, tension stretching between us like a wire pulled taut, and when he finally speaks, his voice is rough with something I cannot quite identify. The truth, Eleanor. I need the truth from you. I do not understand what truth you need from me. My confusion must show on my face because Alexander leans back slightly, his expression shifting into something darker and more painful, shadows gathering in his winter-gray eyes like storm clouds blocking out light. 3 months ago, my younger sister Catherine worked at the Meridian under Vincent Carstairs. She endured his management for nearly 5 months before she quit abruptly without explanation, and when I asked her what happened, she would not tell me the details, but I knew someone had hurt her because she was different after that place, quieter and more fragile, like something inside her had cracked. His voice remains controlled, but I hear the rage simmering beneath it, molten and dangerous. And suddenly pieces start falling into place with sickening clarity. I have been investigating Vincent and the Meridian ever since, watching the patterns, waiting to understand what happened to Catherine, and whether anyone else was being hurt the same way. Tonight, when I saw him humiliating you in front of everyone laughing while you tried to defend yourself through tears, I recognized the same cruelty she must have experienced. Alexander's hands curl into fists on his knees, tendons standing out against his skin, and the intensity of his focus pins me in place like a butterfly on a board. I need you to tell me everything you know about how Vincent treated the female staff, every detail you can remember no matter how small, because Catherine will not speak about it, and I need to understand what he did to her, what he did to all of you. My mind races backward through 2 years of working at the Meridian, memories I have tried to forget surfacing like bodies rising from dark water, and suddenly I am seeing patterns I ignored because I needed the job needed to survive, needed to believe it was not as bad as it felt. Other girls crying in the walk-in cooler during their breaks, mascara streaking their faces while they gasped for composure before returning to the dining room. Whispered warnings passed between servers about staying out of Vincent's way when he was in certain moods, about not being alone with him in the office, about how some girls seemed to bear the brunt of his cruelty more than others. The way he targeted specific women, always the ones who were beautiful or vulnerable or both, the ones who needed the job badly enough that they could not afford to fight back. I think of Catherine, of trying to imagine Alexander's sister enduring months of that psychological torture, and my stomach turns over. You think Vincent did something specific to her, beyond the general cruelty? Alexander's expression hardens into something that looks carved from stone, ancient and implacable. I know he did. I just do not know exactly what, and she will not tell me because she is trying to protect me from doing something she considers unforgivable. But tonight, watching him treat you the same way, I realized I could get answers from someone else who survived him. The weight of what he is asking settles over me, and I understand suddenly that I have information this dangerous man desperately wants, which makes me either valuable or dangerous, depending on how this conversation goes. And the whiskey glass feels too heavy in my hand, like it might slip through my fingers and shatter against the expensive floor, spreading amber liquid across white marble. I tell Alexander everything, and the words pour out of me like poison finally being drained from an infected wound. 2 years of observations I tried to ignore, because acknowledging them would have made the job unbearable, and I needed that job, needed the money, needed to survive in this expensive city that eats people like me alive. Vincent's psychological torture of female servers was systematic and deliberate, the way he would praise you one moment and tear you apart the next, keeping everyone off balance and desperate for his approval. How he gave the best sections and shifts to male servers, while women fought over scraps. The hostile environment he cultivated where asking for help was weakness, and making mistakes meant public humiliation. Management above him ignored every complaint, the owner dismissive when anyone tried to report Vincent's behavior, and after a while we all learned that fighting back only made things worse, so we endured and tried to survive our shifts and went home to cry in private. Alexander listens with coiled stillness, his body radiating tension like a wire pulled to breaking point, rage simmering beneath his controlled exterior, turning the air around him hot and dangerous. I tell him about the girls who quit without explanation, the ones who stopped showing up for shifts and never came back, about Sarah who had a panic attack in the kitchen, and about Michelle who started drinking before work just to get through service. Vincent targeted certain women specifically, I continue, always the beautiful ones or the vulnerable ones or both, the ones who were too pretty or too quiet or too desperate for the job, and he seemed to take pleasure in breaking them down, watching them cry and then mocking their tears. When I mentioned that Catherine probably endured worse because she fits that pattern exactly, beautiful and young and needing the work, something shifts in Alexander's expression, and the glass in his hand suddenly cracks, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and blood wells up from his palm where crystal has cut into skin, dark red spreading across his fingers like spilled wine. I move without thinking, my body reacting before my mind catches up, crossing the space between us and grabbing his hand in both of mine, turning it to see the damage while my eyes scan the room desperately for napkins or towels or anything to stop the bleeding. His blood feels warm against my fingers, sticky and vital and shockingly intimate. And when I look up to tell him we need to clean this properly, I find his face inches from mine, his winter gray eyes locked on me with devastating intensity that steals my breath and stops my heart. Eleanor. He says my name in a voice I have never heard from him before, rough and raw and stripped of all control, like a prayer or a curse, or both at once, and the intimacy of this moment freezes us both in place. His blood on my hands, my fingers wrapped around his wrist where I can feel his pulse hammering fast and hard, the air between us charged with something that has nothing to do with the violence he is planning, and everything to do with the connection building between us, whether we want it or not. I cannot breathe, cannot think, cannot move, caught in his gaze like a butterfly pinned to a board. And some part of me understands that this moment changes everything, that touching him, reaching for him, caring about his injury, has crossed a line I did not know we were approaching. Alexander pulls away, and the loss of contact feels like cold water closing over my head, shocking and disorienting, and I watch as he wraps his injured hand himself with a napkin. From the side table, his movements precise and controlled, like he is rebuilding walls I accidentally knocked down when I reached for him without thinking. "Thank you for the information," he says in a voice stripped of the raw emotion from moments ago, formal and distant like we are strangers conducting business, instead of two people who just shared something intimate and terrifying. Eleanor feels the shift like a physical thing, the warmth between us replaced by careful distance, and I pull my hands back into my lap where they feel useless and empty. The job offer stands regardless of whether you choose to help me further, Alexander continues, his winter gray eyes focused somewhere past my shoulder instead of meeting my gaze. But if you are willing, I need you to go back to the Meridian, to document everything you can, gather evidence, speak to other women who survived Vincent, because he is fired but not destroyed, and I want complete justice for Catherine and everyone else he hurt. The request hangs in the air between us, and I understand immediately how dangerous this is, possibly illegal, definitely entangling me deeper with a criminal whose world operates by rules I do not understand. I should say no, should take whatever money he offers and disappear, start over somewhere. Vincent and Alexander Thornhill cannot reach me. But I think of Catherine, of imagining Alexander's sister enduring months of torture while trying to protect her brother from doing something unforgivable, and I think of myself tonight being humiliated in front of strangers while Vincent laughed, and I think of every other woman he broke or tried to break, and the answer rises from some place deeper than logic or self-preservation. I will do it. Alexander's gaze snaps to mine, something flickering across his expression too fast to identify. You understand what I am asking, what it means if Vincent or anyone else discovers what you are doing. His voice carries warning and something else. Concern, maybe? Like my safety matters to him beyond my usefulness. I understand, I tell him. And I do. I understand I am agreeing to spy and gather evidence and possibly testify against a man who has already proven he will retaliate. I understand I am choosing to stay in Alexander Thornhill's orbit instead of running as far and fast as I can. But some things matter more than safety, more than the smart choice, and justice for women who could not fight back feels like one of those things. Alexander studies me for a long moment, his expression shifting into something almost tender, the hardness around his eyes softening into something that looks like respect or admiration or both. Nothing will happen to you, he says quietly, and the promise in his voice sounds absolute and unbreakable. I will protect you no matter what, Eleanor. You have my word, and my word means something in this city. No one will touch you while you are under my protection. I should not believe him, should not trust a man whose protection comes with blood on his hands, but sitting in his expensive penthouse with his injury still bleeding through the napkin because he shattered glass hearing about his sister's suffering, I find that I do believe him completely. That terrifies me more than anything else tonight, the certainty settling into my bones that this dangerous stranger will keep me safe, that I trust him despite every rational reason not to, that somewhere between the restaurant and this moment, I started believing Alexander Thornhill is exactly the kind of man who keeps his promises no matter the cost. Over the next week, Eleanor returns to the Meridian, and the familiar space feels different now, contaminated by knowledge she cannot unknow, every corner holding memories of women who suffered while the rest of us pretended not to notice, because noticing meant becoming responsible, and responsibility felt too heavy when we were all just trying to survive. Vincent has been temporarily replaced by Gerald, an older manager who speaks softly and treats the staff with distant professionalism, but everyone knows Vincent remains influential with ownership, his termination more of a suspension while investigations proceed, and his shadow lingers in the way servers flinch at sudden movements and avoid the back hallway where he used to corner women for private conversations that left them shaking. Eleanor waitresses her shifts while secretly meeting with former employees during breaks, coffee shops and park benches, becoming confessional spaces where women finally speak about what they endured, and she documents everything in careful notes that she knows Alexander will use to build whatever case he is constructing. Each night she reports to Alexander at the penthouse, and their meetings crackle with tension that has nothing to do with Vincent and everything to do with the way Alexander watches her like she is something precious and dangerous at once. Professional boundaries blurring more with each visit until Eleanor cannot remember why they pretended those boundaries mattered. Alexander feeds her dinner during debriefs, expensive takeout eaten at his kitchen island, while they discuss strategy and patterns, Thai food one night, and Italian the next, and sushi the night after, and somewhere between reviewing testimony and analyzing documentation, the conversations shift into something more personal, more intimate, more dangerous than anything involving criminal justice. He asks about her life beyond the meridian, what dreams she abandoned to pay rent, and Eleanor finds herself sharing things she never tells anyone, about the art degree she quit after 2 years when her parents died in a car accident and the insurance money ran out, about how painting made her feel like she could create beauty in a world determined to be ugly, about the loneliness of being 26 and alone in a city full of people who see right through her. Alexander listens like her words matter more than anything. His winter gray eyes focus completely on her face, and she watches him absorb her confessions with an intensity that makes her feel seen for the first time in years, truly seen not as a waitress or a body in a uniform, but as Eleanor, complicated and damaged, and still somehow worthy of his complete attention. The attraction builds like gathering storm clouds, unspoken but undeniable, in the way his hand brushes hers when passing documents, in how her breath catches when he stands too close, in the loaded silences that stretch between them heavy with everything they are not saying. On the seventh night, Eleanor arrives at the penthouse to find Alexander distracted, tension radiating from his shoulders as he paces near the window overlooking the glittering city. And when she asks what is wrong, he turns to her with an expression that steals her breath, hunger and restraint warring in his features. He crosses the space between them slowly, stops just close enough that she can feel his heat, and tells her this is becoming impossible, being near her and not touching her, pretending this is only about Vincent when every moment with her feels like exquisite torture. Eleanor discovers that Vincent is planning retaliation on the eighth night when Maria texts her a screenshot of messages circulating among current staff, warnings that Vincent has been asking questions about Eleanor specifically, about where she lives and what shifts she works and who she has been meeting with, his inquiries wrapped in casual language that barely masks the threat underneath. Maria adds her own message, "Be careful, he knows something," and Eleanor feels cold dread settle into her stomach because she has been so focused on gathering evidence that she did not consider how exposed she has become, how many people have seen her meeting with former employees, how obvious her investigation must be to anyone paying attention. She shows Alexander the messages during that night's debrief and watches his expression harden into something murderous, his jaw tightening as he reads Vincent's thinly veiled threats, but he tells her to continue as planned, that Vincent is cornered and desperate, which makes him dangerous, but also means they are close to having everything they need. Eleanor wants to believe him, wants to trust that Alexander's protection is as absolute as he promises, but fear has begun living in her chest like a second heartbeat, constant and exhausting. 3 nights later she closes at the Meridian, the last server to finish side work, and Gerald, the temporary manager, locks the front door behind her at 11 at night, the parking garage dim and echoing as her footsteps click against concrete. She is halfway to her car when she hears it, other footsteps behind her that match her rhythm, then fall out of sync. Someone else in the garage moving with purpose, and panic floods her system, instant and overwhelming. Eleanor does not turn around, does not want to confirm what her instincts are screaming, just walks faster toward her car that suddenly seems impossibly far away, her hands already fumbling for her phone, her heels catching on the uneven concrete. The footsteps behind her speed up. She runs, abandoning dignity for survival, her thumb finding Alexander's contact and pressing call, while her breath comes in gasps that echo off concrete pillars and parked cars. He answers on the first ring, his voice sharp and immediate. "Eleanor, What is wrong? And she gasps out the words. Parking garage, someone following me. Meridian, her voice breaking on his name. Hide, he commands. Stay on the line. I am coming, do not hang up. Eleanor, hide now. She spots a gap between a truck and a pillar and wedges herself into the narrow space, her body pressed against cold concrete and warm metal, her heart hammering so violently she thinks it will give away her location like a beacon. The footsteps grow closer, methodical now, searching, and Eleanor holds her breath as a shadow falls across her hiding spot, a shape she cannot quite see but can feel, presence radiating threat. Alexander's voice in her ear. Still there, sweetheart, talk to me. But she cannot speak, cannot move, cannot do anything except exist in this moment of pure terror, waiting for the shadow to find her. The footsteps pause. Eleanor closes her eyes. The shadow shifts closer. The footsteps pass, and Eleanor stays frozen in her hiding spot between the truck and the pillar, her body pressed against cold concrete that bites through her thin work shirt, her lungs burning with the effort of holding her breath, because making any sound feels like inviting death. Alexander's voice in her ear, low and urgent. Still there, sweetheart. Talk to me. I need to know you are there. And the endearment barely registers through the terror flooding her system, except as proof that he is real and coming, and she just has to survive the next few minutes. She hears the footsteps retreat, echoing off concrete and metal in a rhythm that suggests her pursuer is searching other rows, and she forces herself to take shallow, silent breaths while her heart hammers so violently she thinks it will crack her ribs. Minutes stretch like hours, each second an eternity of waiting and fear. Alexander's voice the only thing keeping her tethered to sanity as he murmurs reassurances and commands, "Do not move, do not make a sound. I am 5 minutes away. Just hold on, Eleanor." Then headlights sweep across the parking garage entrance, bright and sudden, and she hears the roar of multiple engines, expensive and powerful. Alexander's car followed by two others that screech to stops that echo like gunshots. Car doors slam and she hears voices, sharp commands in tones that promise violence, and suddenly Alexander is there, rounding the row where she hides, his eyes scanning frantically until they land on her wedged between the vehicles. He reaches her in 3 strides and pulls her out of the narrow space with hands that shake despite their gentleness, his palms framing her face as he checks for injuries with barely restrained panic, his winter gray eyes moving over every inch of her visible skin. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" Eleanor look at me, and she realizes she is shaking uncontrollably, tremors that start in her core and radiate outward until her teeth chatter. Alexander's men spread through the garage, searching with methodical efficiency, their movements coordinated and purposeful. But Alexander ignores them completely, his entire focus on her as he wraps his coat around her shoulders, the fabric still warm from his body and smelling like expensive cologne and safety. He guides her to his car with an arm around her waist because her legs do not seem to remember how to work properly, and once inside the leather interior that smells like wealth and security, Eleanor breaks. The sobs come from somewhere deep and primal, weeks of tension and tonight's terror pouring out in gasping cries that shake her whole body, and Alexander pulls her against his chest and holds her with devastating tenderness, one hand cradling her head while the other presses her closer. He murmurs into her hair, words she cannot quite process, but that feel like promises and apologies and rage all tangled together. When she can finally breathe again, when the sobs have faded to hiccups and trembling, Alexander tips her face up with fingers under her chin, and she sees something murderous in his expression, something cold and final that should terrify her. He promises vengeance in a voice like death itself, tells her that whoever did this will pay in ways that make Vincent's fate look merciful, that no one threatens what is his and survives intact. Eleanor should be afraid of that tone, of the casual certainty with which he discusses retribution, of the possessiveness in calling her his. Instead, she feels safe for the first time in hours, protected by this dangerous man who holds her like she is something precious, worth burning the world to defend. Alexander takes Eleanor to the penthouse instead of her apartment, which he declares unsafe in a tone that leaves no room for argument, and she is too shaken to protest anyway, her body still trembling with aftershocks of terror that make her feel disconnected from her own skin. He settles her on his couch with careful hands, arranging throw pillows behind her back like she might break if handled too roughly. And then he starts a fire in the fireplace despite the mild spring weather, the flames catching and growing until orange light flickers across the modern space and casts dancing shadows on the walls. He brings her tea in a delicate cup that she accepts but does not drink, her hands wrapped around the porcelain just to feel the warmth seep into her cold fingers, and his careful attention feels like being handled as something precious, something worth protecting, a sensation so foreign after years of being invisible that it almost hurts. Eleanor watches him move through his space. With fluid efficiency, this dangerous man being impossibly gentle, fetching a blanket to drape over her shoulders, adjusting the fire, checking his phone with sharp movements that betray the violence simmering beneath his controlled exterior. She asks what happens now, her voice smaller than she wants it to be. And Alexander crosses to her and crouches before the couch, so they are eye level, his winter-gray eyes intense and focused entirely on her. Vincent has escalated, he says with calm certainty. That should sound insane but somehow does not, which means I will end this tonight. The words fall between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through Eleanor's chest. His calm certainty should disturb her, should make her recoil from this man who discusses ending lives with the same tone someone might use to discuss closing a business deal. But instead, Eleanor finds herself trusting him completely, believing without question that he will do exactly what he promises. She asks if he will kill Vincent, the question direct and unflinching because she needs to hear him say it, needs to understand exactly what she is condoning by staying silent. Alexander does not lie, does not soften the truth for her comfort. He says Vincent will never hurt anyone again, and that is all she needs to know, his voice flat and final. And Eleanor understands that he is offering her deniability, a thin barrier between her conscience and the reality of what will happen tonight. She nods, a single sharp movement of acceptance, and some part of her knows she should feel guilty for essentially ordering a death, should be horrified by her own complicity in whatever Alexander will do in the dark hours ahead. She feels only relief, clean and uncomplicated, washing through her like rain after drought. Vincent terrorized women for years, hurt Catherine and Maria and countless others, stalked Eleanor through a parking garage with intentions she does not want to imagine, and if Alexander removes him from the world, then the world will be safer for it. The moral simplicity should disturb her, but it does not. Alexander stands and retrieves his coat from where he draped it over a chair, shrugging into the expensive fabric with movements that seem to transform him before her eyes. The gentle man who brought her tea disappearing behind the mask of something harder and infinitely more dangerous. He tells her he will leave men outside, that she is safe here, that he will return before dawn, and Eleanor believes him because Alexander Thornhill does not make promises he cannot keep. Alexander leaves her with 2 guards outside the penthouse, men who nod respectfully and call her ma'am like she is someone worth deferring to instead of a waitress who spilled wine and cried in front of strangers just weeks ago. And after Alexander closes the door behind him with a final lingering look that promises violence in return, Eleanor stands alone in the vast space and knows she should sleep, but cannot imagine closing her eyes when her mind races with images of what Alexander is doing right now in the dark city beyond these windows. She showers in Alexander's guest bathroom, standing under water hot enough to burn, scrubbing away the parking garage terror and the feeling of being hunted. And when she emerges pink and raw, she finds clothes he left folded on the counter, soft, expensive things that smell like his detergent. some cedar and mint combination that makes her think of safety, and she pulls on the shirt that falls to her thighs and feels like being wrapped in his presence. Eleanor wanders his home studying the details that reveal him in ways his carefully controlled words never could, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books on philosophy and history, discovering a classical music collection organized with meticulous precision, finding art books showcasing Renaissance paintings and modern abstracts that suggest depths she is only beginning to understand. On the mantel above the fireplace, where orange flames still flicker and dance, she finds a single photograph in a silver frame. A young woman with Alexander's eyes smiling at the camera with unguarded joy. And Eleanor knows without being told that this is Catherine before Vincent broke something in her, before the world taught her to be afraid. She understands Alexander's rage now in a way that makes her chest ache, understands his need for justice that goes beyond law or mercy, because some hurts demand answering, and some people forfeit their right to exist when they destroy innocent things. Eleanor finds the whiskey Alexander poured earlier, the glass still sitting where she left it, and she refills it with too much amber liquid that burns going down and spreads warmth through her chest, then carries it to the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the glittering city spread below, like scattered diamonds on black velvet. She sits on the floor with her back against the cold glass, knees pulled to her chest, watching traffic move in rivers of red and white light, while she sips whiskey and thinks about the man who is somewhere out there, ending a life because someone threatened her. Hours pass in a strange suspended state where time feels meaningless, the bottle beside her growing lighter as the sky beyond the city skyline shifts from black to deep blue to the pale gray that promises dawn, and Eleanor feels disconnected from herself, from the woman she was just weeks ago, who worried about tips and rent and whether her life would always be this small. Near dawn, she hears the door, the quiet click of the lock and whisper of hinges, and she turns from her position by the window to see Alexander enter. And something in her chest clenches tight, because he looks different, bloodless but changed. Something dark swimming in his expression that speaks of things done in darkness that cannot be undone. Their eyes meet across the room, and Eleanor feels everything shift, the air itself charging with electricity that raises the fine hairs on her arms and makes her breath catch. And she knows with absolute certainty that whatever happens next will change everything again, that they are standing on the edge of something that will either save them both or destroy them completely. Neither speaks as the silence stretches between them, thick and electric, charged with everything unspoken over the past weeks. And then Alexander crosses to her slowly with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate, like he is giving her time to move away, to refuse what hangs unspoken in the air between them. But Eleanor stays rooted by the window with dawn light breaking behind her and casting her in silver and gold, her heart racing for entirely different reasons now, terror replaced by anticipation that coils hot and tight in her belly. He stops inches away, close enough that she has to tilt her head back to hold his gaze, close enough that she can see the fine lines at the corners of his winter-gray eyes and the muscle ticking in his jaw, and the heat radiating from his body makes her want to sway forward and close that last impossible distance. He tells her it is done. Vincent will never hurt anyone again. It is over, his voice rough like gravel and smoke, but his eyes say something else entirely, something about beginnings instead of endings, about doors closing and others opening into territories neither of them have mapped. Eleanor asks if she can stay tonight, here, with him, the words tumbling out before she can reconsider their weight, and she watches Alexander's control visibly crack, like ice under pressure, something raw and hungry breaking through the careful walls he maintains. He asks if she understands what she is requesting, who he is, what being with him means, and there is warning in his tone, a last chance to retreat to safety before crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed, because he is not a good man, and his world is violence and darkness and moral compromises that would break most people. Eleanor surprises herself with her certainty when she answers, her voice steady despite the way her pulse hammers in her throat, telling him she knows exactly who he is, has seen him gentle and has seen him dangerous, has watched him care for his sister and has accepted his protection, knowing what that protection costs. And the question is not whether she understands, but whether he wants her despite the danger she brings, the normalcy she represents, the complication of someone who did not grow up in his world and might never fully understand its brutal mathematics. Alexander answers by kissing her, his hands framing her face with devastating gentleness that contrasts with the fierce hunger of his mouth on hers, and Eleanor feels the world tilt sideways as every nerve ending ignites at once, weeks of tension and denial combusting into something that steals her breath and makes her knees weak. She grabs his shirt to stay upright, fisting the expensive fabric in her hands, and Alexander makes a sound low in his throat that sounds like surrender and claiming all at once, like he has been holding back an ocean and the dam just broke. When he pulls away, they are both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together, his hand still cradling her face like she is something precious that might shatter, and Eleanor realizes she is trembling but not from cold or fear. From want that has been building since the moment he walked into the Meridian and looked at her like she mattered. Alexander asks her one more time if she is certain, giving her one final chance to choose safety over this beautiful, dangerous thing between them. And Eleanor answers by kissing him back with everything she has been holding inside, yes, and yes, and yes. The kiss is desperate, weeks of tension igniting instantly like gasoline meeting spark, and Alexander kisses like a man starving, like she is oxygen and he has been drowning, his mouth claiming hers with fierce possession that makes her knees buckle and her hands clutch at his shoulders for balance. Eleanor meets his intensity with her own hunger, matching him beat for beat, opening to him when his tongue sweeps against her lips, tasting whiskey and something darker, something that is just him, and she feels the vibration of his groan against her mouth like a physical caress. When they break apart, they are both breathing hard, chests heaving, and Alexander rests his forehead against hers, with eyes closed, like he is praying or trying to memorize this moment before it dissolves into morning regret. And then he confesses in a voice gone rough with emotion that he has wanted her since that first night, watching her refuse to cower despite her tears streaming and her body shaking, seeing her strength beneath the vulnerability, like steel wrapped in silk. He tells her that being near her and not touching her has been exquisite torture, sitting across from her during their debriefs while she ate and talked and laughed, watching her mouth form words, when all he could think about was kissing her, until neither of them could remember their own names. Eleanor admits the same with trembling honesty, her hand sliding up to frame his face, feeling the scratch of stubble against her palms, telling him that this dangerous man makes her feel safer than she has in years, that his darkness does not frighten her the way it probably should, because it calls to something in her she did not know existed, until he walked into the Meridian and looked at her like she mattered in a world that had spent years teaching her she was disposable. She confesses that she has been imagining this, imagining him, imagining what it would feel like to be touched by hands that have done terrible things, but hold her like she is something precious. And the confession breaks whatever final restraint Alexander has been maintaining. He sweeps her into his arms like she weighs nothing, lifting her, clean off the floor with muscles that flex beneath his shirt, and Eleanor wraps her legs around his waist instinctively as he carries her through the penthouse toward his bedroom, kissing her the entire way, pausing to press her against walls, just to feel her gasp against his mouth. The bedroom is dark and warm, lit only by the rising sun painting everything gold and rose, and when Alexander lays her on his bed, she sinks into softness that smells like him, cedar and mint, and something expensive she cannot name. He follows her down, covering her body with his, careful despite his urgency, and the weight of him grounds her in a way that makes everything real, makes this moment crystallize into something she knows she will remember for the rest of her life, regardless of what comes after. The night becomes about claiming and being claimed, about Eleanor learning the geography of Alexander's body, the scars that map a violent history, the places that make him groan and shudder beneath her touch, about Alexander worshipping her with devastating focus, learning what makes her arch and cry out his name like a prayer. They come together with desperate intensity, then again with aching slowness, then once more near dawn with tender exhaustion. And somewhere between the second and third time, Eleanor realizes this is not just physical, that what is happening between them is stitching their souls together in ways that will leave permanent marks. Eleanor wakes tangled in expensive sheets that feel like water against her bare skin. Morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and painting everything in shades of amber and gold. And for a moment, she does not remember where she is, until she turns her head and sees Alexander sleeping beside her, his face relaxed in a way she has never seen before, all the hard edges softened by sleep and vulnerability. Years fall away from him like this, the silver at his temples catching the light, his breathing deep and even, one arm thrown across his eyes, as if even unconscious he is shielding himself from too much illumination. And Eleanor studies him with something close to wonder, this complicated, dangerous man who killed for justice last night and made love to her with devastating tenderness only hours ago. The contradiction should disturb her, should send her running from this bed and this penthouse and this life that has nothing to do with the safe, ordinary existence she lived just weeks ago. But instead, it feels like finally understanding a language she has been trying to learn her entire life without knowing the words existed, like puzzle pieces clicking into place to reveal a picture she never knew she was assembling. Alexander wakes while she is watching him, his eyes opening slowly and focusing on her face with an intensity that makes her breath catch. And then he smiles with rare, unguarded warmth that transforms his features from severe to beautiful, the kind of smile that makes her understand why dangerous men inspire devotion and fear in equal measure. He reaches for her without speaking, pulling her close until she is pressed against his chest with her head tucked beneath his chin, and he kisses her temple with lips that linger on her skin, murmuring good morning against her hair in a voice still rough with sleep, intimate and possessive in ways that make heat curl low in her belly despite the exhaustion in her muscles. This intimacy feels more dangerous than anything that came before it, more threatening than Vincent's cruelty, or the footsteps in the parking garage, or even the moment Alexander told her what he planned to do, because this is her heart becoming tangled with someone who lives in a world of violence and moral complexity that could destroy her without even trying. Eleanor realizes with crystalline clarity that she is falling in love with a man whose world could consume her completely, who operates by rules she barely understands, whose protection comes with a price she has not yet calculated, and the realization should terrify her. But instead, it settles into her bones like truth, undeniable and absolute. She realizes she does not care about the danger, or the darkness, or the impossible future they are building, because being held by Alexander Thornhill in the morning light feels more real than anything in her carefully constructed safe life ever did. And some risks are worth taking even when you know the odds are stacked against survival. Alexander pulls back to look at her, his gray eyes searching her face like he is reading every thought crossing her mind, and his hand comes up to cup her cheek with gentleness that still surprises her coming from hands that have done terrible things. And Eleanor leans into his touch like a flower turning towards sun, choosing this, choosing him, choosing the beautiful, dangerous thing growing between them, despite every logical reason to run. Over breakfast, reality intrudes with the sharp edge of a blade cutting through silk. and Alexander receives a call that transforms his relaxed morning features back into the severe mask Eleanor recognizes from their first meeting, his jaw tightening as he listens to whoever speaks on the other end, with an intensity that makes her stomach clench with instinctive dread. He ends the call without pleasantries, setting his phone down with controlled precision that signals danger more clearly than violence ever could, and when he looks at her, his gray eyes have gone cold and calculating, in ways that remind her exactly who he is, beneath the tenderness he showed her in the dark. Vincent's disappearance has attracted attention, he tells her in a voice stripped of emotion. The police are investigating because apparently someone filed a missing persons report, probably family who actually cared despite what a monster he was. And worse, much worse, Vincent had connections to a rival criminal organization that now wants answers about what happened to their associate. Alexander's handling of Vincent has created complications that ripple outward like cracks in ice, threatening to break apart the careful balance of power that keeps this city's underworld from exploding into open warfare. And he needs to manage the situation carefully to protect both his business interests and Eleanor, though she suspects she ranks considerably higher on his priority list than territory or money. She asks if she is in danger, the question emerging smaller than she intended, and Alexander's jaw tightens further, muscle jumping beneath skin as his hand curls into a fist on the table hard enough that his knuckles go white. He promises she will never be harmed, that he will burn the entire city down first, that he will destroy anyone who even thinks about touching her, and his vehemence should frighten her. This casual discussion of mass destruction delivered over cooling coffee and half-eaten toast. But instead, Eleanor finds it intoxicating, finds herself leaning toward him like a flower bending toward dangerous heat. She offers to help, to use her connection to the Meridian staff to gather intelligence about Vincent's associates, about who might be asking questions, and Alexander refuses immediately with a sharp, decisive gesture, telling her absolutely not. She has been through enough already. She is not going back into that world. But Eleanor insists with newfound steel in her spine, telling him she is already involved, already a target if anyone connects her to Alexander or figures out she provided the information that led to Vincent's death. And if she is going to be in danger anyway, she might as well be useful instead of just protected like some helpless possession locked away in a tower. Alexander stares at her with something between fury and admiration, his eyes searching her face like he is trying to understand how this woman who served wine and smiled through humiliation 2 weeks ago is now arguing to be deployed as an intelligence asset in a criminal investigation. And Eleanor stares back, unflinching, refusing to be relegated to safety when she has already chosen to step into his world with open eyes. Alexander reluctantly agrees, but assigns her constant protection, 2 men who follow at careful distances and scan every room she enters like threats might materialize from air itself. And over the following days, Eleanor becomes enmeshed in Alexander's world in ways that blur every boundary she thought existed between her old life and this new dangerous reality. She meets his sister Catherine on the 3rd day, a fragile but kind woman with Alexander's same gray eyes, but none of his hardness, and Catherine takes Eleanor's hands with tears streaming down her face and thanks her for helping bring Vincent to justice, for giving voice to what Catherine could not say, for being brave enough to stand against a monster when so many others looked away. Eleanor holds this broken woman and understands with new clarity why Alexander became what he is, why he walks through darkness without flinching, because sometimes love demands terrible things, and protection requires a willingness to stain your hands with blood. She learns the structure of Alexander's organization through careful observation and whispered explanations, discovers the careful balance of violence and honor that governs it, the codes that separate Alexander's people from the truly monstrous elements that prowl this city's underworld, like wolves circling prey. She discovers Alexander is not merely a criminal, but a man trying to protect his territory and people from worse monsters, that he enforces order in places where law cannot reach, that the violence he commits prevents greater violence from consuming everything. The moral complexity does not absolve him of his sins, but it complicates her judgment in ways that make simple condemnation impossible, makes her understand that the world operates in shades of gray, far more nuanced than the black and white categories she once believed defined good and evil. Meanwhile, the attraction between them intensifies with every passing hour, professional distance abandoned completely as stolen moments become passionate encounters that leave her breathless and burning. They make love in his office between meetings, against the windows overlooking the city, in the shower at dawn before the world wakes and demands his attention. Alexander's carefully maintained control fractures around her, like ice breaking beneath pressure, his need for her overwhelming the discipline that usually governs every aspect of his existence. And Eleanor discovers power in being wanted by such a powerful man, discovers that she can unmake him with a touch the same way he unmakes her. She also discovers fear that this cannot last, that intensity this consuming burns too hot to sustain, that eventually reality will intrude and destroy what they are building in this fragile bubble of passion and danger. She catches herself watching him sometimes with something close to grief, memorizing the way light catches in his gray eyes, the sound of his rare laughter, the feel of his hands learning her body like sacred text. Because part of her believes this is temporary, that women like her do not get to keep men like Alexander Thornhill, that fairy tales end and ordinary waitresses wake from dreams of dangerous princes who kill dragons and claim kingdoms. The rival organization makes their move on a Tuesday afternoon when Eleanor is meeting with Catherine for coffee, and the call comes through on Alexander's private line with news that turns his expression to stone. One of his men, Marcus, has been taken, snatched from a parking lot in broad daylight, with 3 witnesses who saw black SUVs and men with guns and calculated efficiency that speaks of planning and resources. Alexander listens without speaking, his hand tightening around his phone until Eleanor worries it will shatter like the glass did weeks ago. And when he ends the call, his eyes have gone cold and flat, in ways that make her understand viscerally what it means when people whisper his name with fear, threading through their voices like poison through veins. They are demanding a meeting, he tells her in a voice stripped of everything except lethal calculation. They want to discuss Vincent and territorial boundaries, and the fact that Alexander eliminated someone connected to their organization without permission or consultation. And Eleanor watches him transform before her eyes into the dangerous man his reputation promises, watches the tenderness that softens his features around her disappear beneath cold strategic thinking that weighs lives against territory and calculates acceptable losses with mathematics of survival. He makes calls with clipped, efficient language, summoning his people, arranging security, planning for war with the kind of precision that speaks of experience doing exactly this. And Eleanor sits frozen on his couch, understanding for the first time truly what he is capable of, what it means to love a man who navigates violence like other people navigate traffic, with practiced ease and instinctive reflexes honed by necessity and repetition. He tells her she will stay at the penthouse, locked down with 6 guards instead of the usual 2, until this is resolved, his tone brooking no argument. And Eleanor agrees because she can see the fear beneath his calculation, can see him already imagining her caught in crossfire or taken like Marcus, can see that his love for her has become a vulnerability he cannot afford in moments like this. But even as she nods and promises to stay safe, her mind is already racing through fragments of memory, conversations overheard during her weeks back at the Meridian gathering intelligence, and suddenly understanding clicks into place, with the clarity of puzzle pieces sliding together to reveal a picture she did not know she was assembling. One of the Meridian's owners, a man named Donald Vance, who visited twice during her investigation, she overheard him on the phone in the hallway outside the kitchen, talking about shipments and percentages, and someone named Hastings who needed to be kept happy. And at the time, she dismissed it as business conversation she did not understand, but now she recognizes the name Hastings as the leader of the rival organization, recognizes that Donald Vance has connections that could give Alexander leverage he does not know exists. This information could change everything, could give Alexander power in negotiations, could prevent the war. She can see him preparing to wage with grim inevitability, but he is already moving toward the door with his men, already mentally in the warehouse or docks or wherever this meeting will happen, already unreachable behind walls of strategic thinking that leave no room for input from the woman he loves, but cannot afford to see as an equal partner in moments of crisis. Eleanor watches him leave, watches the door close behind him with a finality that feels like separation, and she knows with absolute certainty that she cannot stay here safe and useless while he walks into danger without information that could save lives. Knows that she has to tell him about Vance and Hastings, even if it means disobeying direct orders. Even if it means walking into the kind of danger that could destroy everything they have built in these strange, intense weeks of falling in love while the world burned around them. Eleanor evades her guards with surprising ease because they expect obedience from her, expect the woman Alexander loves to follow his orders like scripture. But she slips out through the service entrance while they monitor the front lobby and catches a cab to the address she pulled from Alexander's phone days ago when he was in the shower, and she was learning the landscape of his dangerous world. The warehouse by the docks looms against the night sky like a monument to violence, all rusted metal and broken windows and the smell of salt water mixing with oil and decay, and Eleanor's hands shake as she pays the driver and approaches on foot because arriving in a cab seems absurdly mundane for walking into what might be her death. She hears voices before she sees anything, male voices sharp with tension and barely restrained violence. And when she rounds the corner, the scene freezes her blood because there are at least 20 men with guns, 10 on each side facing each other across empty concrete like armies before battle. And Alexander stands at the center of his group, radiating lethal intent that makes him look like death itself wearing an expensive suit. She must make some sound, some involuntary gasp or footstep, because every head turns toward her in unison, and the moment stretches into eternity as Alexander's eyes find hers across 30 feet of distance, and his expression cycles through shock, then rage, then pure undiluted terror in the space of 2 seconds, and she watches him start to move toward her, just as another man breaks from the opposite group with frightening speed. Richard Hastings reaches her before Alexander can cross half the distance, his arm locking around her throat and cold metal pressing against her temple with pressure that makes her vision blur, and she hears Alexander roar her name with such anguish that her heart breaks, even as panic floods every nerve ending with electricity that makes her skin feel like it is burning. Hastings pulls her backward, using her body as shield, and his voice near her ear is surprisingly calm when he speaks loud enough for everyone to hear, telling Alexander that perhaps now they can negotiate properly, that he has something Alexander actually values. That territory means nothing compared to the woman whose name Alexander screamed like a prayer to gods who abandoned these docks long ago. Eleanor forces down the panic that threatens to steal her voice and gambles everything on fragments of overheard conversation and intuition and desperate hope, telling Hastings in a voice that only shakes slightly that she knows about his partnership with Donald Vance, about the Meridian being used to launder money from 6 different revenue streams, about the financial records that could bring federal investigators down on his entire operation like the wrath of heaven itself. It is a bluff built on almost nothing. 3 minutes of conversation she barely understood weeks ago, but Hastings goes rigid behind her, and the gun against her temple wavers just slightly, enough that she knows she hit something true. Alexander watches her with an expression she cannot read, something between awe and absolute fury, his body coiled like a spring compressed past tolerance, and she can see him calculating angles and distances and acceptable losses with the part of his mind that navigates violence, like other people navigate morning traffic. Hastings demands to know what evidence exists, where it is kept, who else knows. And Eleanor lies with confidence she did not know she possessed, spinning a story about documentation and insurance policies and lawyers with instructions, her voice growing steadier as his grip loosens fractionally, because men like Hastings understand leverage, and she just became far more valuable alive than dead. Alexander negotiates with the precision of a surgeon cutting away diseased tissue, his voice never rising, but carrying absolute authority that fills the warehouse like gospel being delivered by a prophet who deals in blood instead of salvation. Telling Hastings that territories will be respected going forward with clearly defined boundaries that both organizations will honor. That Vincent's death will be accepted as justice for crimes committed against women, under both their protection rather than provocation requiring retaliation, and that Eleanor will be released unharmed immediately, or Alexander will unleash total war that will cost them both everything they have built over decades of careful consolidation and strategic violence. Hastings listens with calculation flickering behind his eyes, like numbers being tallied on an invisible ledger, weighing the value of pride against the cost of federal investigation into money laundering operations that could dismantle his empire brick by brick. And Eleanor feels the moment he decides she is worth more as leverage surrendered than as hostage maintained. Feels his grip loosen fractionally before he shoves her forward with enough force that she stumbles. Alexander catches her before she falls, pulling her behind him with barely controlled violence that manifests in trembling hands and rigid shoulders, his body a wall between her and every gun in the warehouse. And she hears him giving orders in clipped tones that send his men moving with coordinated efficiency while he backs toward the exit with Eleanor pressed against his spine. The drive to the penthouse happens in silence so thick she could drown in it. Alexander white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and Eleanor pressed against the passenger door, watching his profile and seeing fury and terror warring beneath his control, like tectonic plates grinding toward earthquake. And when they reach his home, he pulls her inside with controlled force that speaks of violence barely restrained. The fight explodes the moment the door closes, Alexander unleashing his terror at nearly losing her in words that cut like knives, telling her she could have died because of her disobedience, that he gave her explicit orders for her protection, that watching Hastings put a gun to her head took years off his life and made him understand what true helplessness feels like. Eleanor fires back her refusal to be a helpless possession locked away in a tower, her right to fight for what matters, her agency in determining acceptable risk, and the argument escalates with them circling each other like storms gathering strength until Alexander pins her against the wall with his body and kisses her with desperate fury that tastes like fear and possession and need that transcends reason. The argument becomes desperate. Kisses becomes violent tenderness, becomes clothes torn and removed with shaking hands, and Alexander carrying her to his bedroom, where they claim each other with intensity that feels like fusion, like atoms combining to create new elements that cannot be separated without destroying both. After, tangled together with sweat cooling on skin and heart still racing, Alexander presses his forehead to hers and admits in a voice stripped raw that he loves her, that she has become his entire world in these few weeks, that losing her would destroy him more completely than any bullet or blade ever could. Eleanor confesses the same truth, that loving him terrifies her, but refusing to love him would be denying something fundamental about who she has become since that first night when he walked into the Meridian and changed everything. They have survived danger and found each other against impossible odds, ordinary woman and dangerous man building something real from chaos. The story closes with them watching sunrise through his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread below them like a kingdom. They have fought to protect, Eleanor wrapped in Alexander's arms with his heartbeat steady against her spine, both understanding that whatever comes next, they face together as equals, as partners, as two people who found love in the space between violence and vulnerability, and chose each other despite every reason to run.